then we will go straight into the second question with yourself, Bruno. And the second question reads as follows. There was a lease that was signed the 29th of 2023, last year, and it was cancelled on 30th December of 2023. So it was cancelled the next following day. The person who signed the lease paid everything in full. This includes the deposit, the rent in advance, and the admin fees, totaling about just over 13,000 rand. Now they want their money back due to that cancellation. What are the consequences, penalties, if any, with this cancellation?
Sure. So short answer is, first of all, a contract is binding. Lease agreements are binding. When a person signs and agrees to do something, our law obviously promotes respecting that contract and all the obligations and duties of the contract. So that's the first thing people need to understand, is this isn't a question of like sometimes we look at things like the Consumer Protection Act and we think that nothing's ever binding. We can enter into deals with people and we can walk away out of any deal for any reason whatsoever. That's not always necessarily the case. So first thing we need to determine is the nature of the relationship between the landlord and the tenant. If the landlord is a business, then we can look into the Consumer Protection Act. We can look into whether there was direct marketing and all those lovely things in the CPA. Normally with commercial relationships, you might find this. If the tenant is a small business, you might be able to rely on the CPA. But usually it's a private relationship between a private landowner and as a supplier and a tenant, right? Now, would the Consumer Protection Act apply? Yes, it's still part of that relationship. However, did you find the place due to direct marketing? And that is very rarely the case, where a person finds a premises of direct marketing and over the phone agrees to rent it out, right? So it's very doubtful that the Consumer Protection Act would afford any tenant the right to exit the contract. It's sort of a cooling off period. In those circumstances, doesn't exist. So now you look at the nature of the agreement. If the agreement made it binding on the parties and a certain sum was payable, rent, deposit, you name it, right? All the terms in the contract would govern the relationship between the parties. So first of all, can the tenant simply cancel the agreement? No. So already in the question, there is an error in terminology to say that the agreement was cancelled the next day. No, it wasn't. If the landlord wants to hold the tenant to the contract, they can hold him to the contract unless the tenant again relies on things like the early termination clause in terms of the Consumer Protection Act. But then the tenant has to give notice, 20 business days notice, and the tenant can be charged a reasonable cancellation penalty. So this now already starts tying into the answer to say, yes, maybe you can exit, maybe you can rely on the CPA to do early termination clause. That's not cooling off. You don't get away with it. There is something that is going to be payable in all likeliness. So you can try cancel it early, but the first month's rent, you're probably not going to get back, because now to find another tenant would have been virtually impossible. You signed the agreement. Now the property is going to sit empty for that first month. So you're probably not going to get that rent back. The admin fee, you're probably also not going to get back, because there was admin. You signed, there was admin involved. And so you're probably going to be liable for the admin fee, leaving only the deposit, but also the potential of future months' rentals as penalties. So the chance of you getting the deposit back, seeing as it's probably going to be equivalent to another month's rental for a contract that potentially would have been 12 months long, in practice, we typically tend to see that as a reasonable cancellation penalty. 1 month's rent is not unreasonable. So I do feel that in the circumstance of cancelling so soon, you're probably going to land up forfeiting your deposit. But that obviously depends on the wording of the contract and whether one can argue that it's reasonable to retain that deposit in lieu of the period of the contract. If, for example, you find that the landlord gets another tenant almost immediately, then arguably one could say that, the landlord's not entitled to claim that deposit. But if not, and it takes now another month or two to find another tenant, then I would say that it's reasonable for the landlord to charge you that deposit in lieu of the damages that he suffered.
Cool. So thank you very much there, Bruno. And then what we'll do is